All right, in this video, I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough of a cheeky little 5-for-1 airdrop route on the Scroll Layer 2 using KELP DAO's restaked ETH. So just a couple of days ago, KELP DAO launched native restaking on the Scroll L2. And what that means is you can take your ETH on Scroll, you can restake it with KELP for WRS ETH, which is liquid restaked ETH. That's going to be getting you KELP DAO points. It's going to be getting you EIGEN points. And then, of course, all of these transactions are on the Scroll L2. And then we can actually take that and use it in DeFi apps on Scroll to leverage up, to increase our exposure to all of those airdrops and to make sure that we max qualify with the amount of capital that we have. And in case you are wondering, yes, there is still time to farm the Scroll L2. I think it's in fact one of the best L2 airdrop targets remaining. And then obviously I think there's still time to farm the KELP DAO airdrop and the EIGEN airdrop. There's probably a month or two left on those. And then the final target that we're going to be hitting actually is Jumper or LIFI, because literally just today, they launched bridging to Scroll. And so the way this 5-for-1 is going to work is, first step, use Jumper to bridge assets, specifically ETH, to the Scroll Layer 2. Jumper is one of my favorite bridges. It's a high value target, and that's airdrop 1. Airdrop 2 is just being on the Scroll Layer 2 and interacting with it. We're going to be increasing our transaction count, our smart contracts interacted with, and the volume that we move on this ecosystem. That's airdrop 2. Airdrops 3 and 4 are coming from restaking that ETH with KELP. When you restake ETH with KELP, you get miles for the KELP airdrop, and then you get EIGEN points for the EIGEN airdrop. So that is airdrops 3 and 4. And then finally, we're going to take our RSW ETH over to Layer Bank, and we're actually going to leverage up using that asset. And this is going to be the 5th airdrop target. Layer Bank has an L point system on right now, and these L points are going to be convertible into the ULAB token from Layer Bank. Now this final airdrop from Layer Bank, I would say, is the lowest priority on the list, but it still counts as number 5, although technically, I think it's a little bit more akin to yield farming than actual airdrop farming, because basically you just accumulate L points based on the amount of dollars that you deposit and borrow from the platform, so it's pretty linear. Anyways, in terms of the step-by-step on this, I've already bridged to Scroll, so I've got 0.21 ETH on Scroll. And in fact, I already do have a little bit of KELP ETH, but I'm going to go over to KELP DAO here, and I'm going to go to restake, and I'm going to get more of it. So I'm going to restake another 0.18 ETH because I want to have a total of about 0.25 ETH restaked with KELP. Okay, great. That transaction went through, and now if I open up my wallet, yeah, I have 0.25 wrapped restaked ETH with KELP DAO. So as you can see, pretty simple. Now I'm already earning multiple airdrops just by doing that. But the next step, if we want to take this to the next level, is to take that asset over to Layer Bank, go to the bank tab up here, and select WRS ETH from the list. Now, there's a couple of different ways to play this. The simplest and lowest risk way is to just deposit your asset to the platform, and that's it. You don't even have to actually enable it as collateral. You can just deposit the asset and you'll be earning points for KELP, EIGEN and Layer Bank, and also, of course, you're doing transactions on Scroll. However, if you want to take this to the next level and you want to actually use leverage so that effectively it's like you have more than the amount of ETH that you actually have because you would deposit it, then borrow something else against it, and then use that asset to get more staked ETH with KELP and then repeat the process. And if you are interested in using leverage on the Layer Bank platform, you can do it manually by clicking this button to make the asset available as collateral and confirming that transaction. And then once you deposit the asset to the platform, you can go borrow something else against it, either ETH or a stable coin if you're feeling even riskier. And the reason why I say that is because if you borrow ETH against staked ETH, they're correlated assets. They won't really diverge in price unless there's a massive black swan depegging event. And so there's much lower risk of you facing a liquidation event in that case. But if you borrow a stable coin against the value of ETH, and then the price of ETH drops really dramatically and quickly, then technically you could be liquidated if you don't keep the loan value high enough. And I would definitely recommend borrowing correlated assets if you can, especially since actually the borrow APR on ETH is still lower than the borrow APR on USDC. However, Layer Bank also has this really useful feature called looping, where instead of manually having to supply the asset, borrow against it, and then loop that process, they will literally do it for you. And if we select this option here, looping, I can simply use this little leverage slider to decide how much I want to actually leverage up on this position. All right, well, I'm back the next day because the scroll network was being super annoying and my transactions weren't going through. But on the positive side, I'm back with my cat this time, so win-win, I suppose. Anyways, like I was saying, when we get to the layer bank phase of this, there's two ways to play it. Either I can loop the borrowing myself, or I can use their looping feature that's built in here. However, there's two reasons why I don't want to use this looping feature, even though it's super easy and I can use up to 3.33x leverage just by sliding this little leverage slider here. But the reason why I don't want to use it is because nowhere in their documents can I find what assets are actually being borrowed and looped against it. And this is potentially relevant because my goal here is to maximize the points for EigenLayer and for KELP DAO. And without a good breakdown of that in their documents here, it makes me worried that potentially it won't actually work out the way that I want it to. And the other reason why it's actually beneficial to just do it manually anyways is because right now, as I was saying previously, there's these bonus EigenLayer points that I can get for minting directly from the source. And I won't get that if I use the loop feature on LayerBank. And so actually, I do think it makes sense to loop it manually by first supplying my assets to the platform. Then I can borrow ETH against it, go back over to KELP DAO, and then loop the process a couple of times until I reach a level that I'm satisfied with. See, my transactions are still failing. This is really annoying. Scroll network is having major issues right now. Okay, well, finally, I got my transaction to go through. And just FYI, if you want to make sure that it goes through right now when the network is being annoyingly glitchy, then you can set high priority gas fees. Of course, you're going to pay more for doing that, but it makes sure that your transaction actually goes through. Okay, so now I've supplied my KELP DAO ETH to LayerBank. As you can see, I have these rewards pending in the lab token. And when you do want to claim them, unfortunately, they do need to vest for 90 days. And you can start the vesting process by clicking on this button right here. Anyways, now that I have deposited my WRS ETH to LayerBank, the next step is to borrow ETH against it. So I'm gonna click ETH, click on the borrow tab, and then theoretically the safe max that it would allow me to borrow is 80% of the value of the collateral that I've deposited to this platform. And the reason why this is safe, even though it's almost to the max borrow threshold, is that these assets are correlated. ETH and WRS ETH should move in price at the same rate, meaning that there would need to be a massive depeg event in order to trigger a liquidation. That said, I still like to have a greater margin of error, even in situations like this where I'm borrowing correlated assets. And I would recommend that you do the same and never actually max out your borrow because you never know. So I'm gonna borrow some ETH against the value of the collateral that I just deposited. Okay, perfect. So now I have some more ETH and I can go back over to KELP and I can stake again. And the idea is to loop this process a couple of times until we reach a level that we're comfortable with. And remember, every time that I mint new ETH directly from KELP DAO, I'm also earning bonus EigenLayer points for that as well. So I'm just gonna loop this a couple more times and then I'll come back and give a brief recap of the pros and cons, the benefits and the risks of this strategy. All right, so I'm just making the final deposit here. I looped it 5 times. So I supplied it 5 times actually, and I borrowed 4 times against it. The total end result is that I've supplied 0.53 ETH to the platform and I've borrowed 0.265 ETH against it. The value of my loan is currently at 70% of the value of my collateral, which is pretty reasonable. The max value is 80% and liquidation is triggered at 90%, which means there would need to be, like I said, a massive depeg event in order for this to go sideways. So that is the strategy. Now let's just quickly break down and recap the pros and the cons, the risks and the benefits. Now, in terms of the risks, we've got EigenLayer, we've got KELP, we've got the Scroll Layer 2, and we've got LayerBank. If any one of these apps or protocols rugs, then obviously this is gonna go badly for us. On the pro side, however, we just did a bunch of transactions on the Scroll network, increased our volume on Scroll, then we're earning points for EigenLayer, we're earning points for the KELP DAO airdrop, which is one of the larger restaking or liquid restaking tokens. It's not quite as big as Renzo or EtherFi, but it's still growing pretty quickly and it's probably gonna have a reasonably sized airdrop. And then of course, we're earning the lower priority lab tokens for LayerBank as well. Although I won't expect these to actually be worth that much, to be honest. Oh, and of course we interacted with the jumper bridge as well. So that is the play. That is the 5-for-1 airdrop on the Scroll L2. And using a little bit of leverage, I was able to increase my exposure and position for all of these airdrops as well. So of course it is a little bit risky because we also added that leverage piece to this. But of course, I do think that the rewards are more than going to cover that additional risk. So hopefully you found this little tutorial helpful. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day.